Good evening. I'm Liz Miller, and I am your host for the session with Sarah Hollowell and Erica Waters. I want to take this opportunity to welcome you all on behalf of Humanities Tennessee and to thank our key sponsors, Metro Nashville Arts Commission, Ingram Content Group, Tennessee Arts Commission, Vanderbilt University, and Parnassus Books. I would also like to let you know that if you're watching on Facebook Live or YouTube and you want to ask questions during the session, please feel free to do so. Also, there will be a link for our book buying at the top of the chat, and the link will take you to our wonderful bookseller, Parnassus Books. Remember, the festival is free and it's a nonprofit event in part by donations from individuals. If you appreciate the event and want to support it, you can do so on the app or using the Humanities Tennessee website. Now I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce our wonderful authors. First, we have Sarah Hollowell. Hi, Sarah.
Hello.
Sarah graduated from Ball State University with a degree in creative writing, and she remains there to this day. Sarah volunteers with teen writers through the Alpha Workshop, raises small aliens in the shapes of cats, listens to many podcasts, and repeatedly makes the mistake of watching horror movies alone at night. Sarah's debut YA contemporary fantasy novel is A Dark and Starless Forest. We're so happy to have you here, Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you.
And next up, we have Erica Waters. Hi, Erica.
Hi.
Erica grew up in the pine woods of rural Florida and now resides in Nashville, Tennessee with her spouse and two terrible dogs named Nutmeg and Luna. She has a master's degree in English and works as a university writing tutor. She's the author of Ghostwood Song, which was a Bram Stoker Awards finalist and a YASL 2021 Best Fiction for Young Adults nominee. Her second book, The River Has Teeth, was an indie next pick and received a starred review from Kirkus. Erica's forthcoming title, The Restless Start, will be published in the fall of 2022. Thank you so much for joining us today. I would like to hear from you all if you would each give a quick pitch of your book. Sarah, would you start?
Yeah. So A Dark and Starless Forest is the book I wrote basically to write about creepy forests in Indiana, which I grew up with. And it's about a young magical girl who is being raised in an isolated sort of lake house with several other magical teens. And everything's going mostly okay until her sister disappears. And then things just keep getting worse after that.
It sounds wonderful. Thank you. Erica?
So The River Has Teeth is a young adult contemporary fantasy about a girl whose sister goes missing near a nature park. And when the police don't turn up any leads, this character, Natasha, turns to a local witch named Della for help, not realizing that Della is harboring some secrets of her own. Della thinks that her own mom, who was turned into a monster by a spell gone wrong, might be responsible for the missing sister's disappearance. And so they work together to find Natasha's sister, and lots of dark and spooky things ensue.
Sounds like both are very appropriate for the season.
Yes.
In both of your books, the main character's plight is to save their sisters. What inspired this plot, and do you have siblings?
I have two siblings. I have an older brother and an older sister. I am much younger than both, 9 and 6 years younger. And I don't know if they directly inspired it or anything. It's mostly just I always end up writing about siblings. There's something about sibling relationships that I just love to write. I think they're really interesting and really beautiful and complicated. And I don't think I've ever written anything where it wasn't someone and their sibling. So I think it was just exploring that and then kind of wanting to think about what it feels like when that relationship feels cut off because one of them is gone.
Absolutely. That's the bond between siblings is very special.
Yeah,
Erica?
I kind of the same thing. I write about siblings a lot too. Both of my first two books have sibling relationships centered pretty prominently. I have three older brothers and an older sister, and I think especially my sister I'm the closest to, and like our lives now are so different. Like she has four kids, I don't have any kids. Like we live in different states, different cities, totally different lives. But I don't know, there's this bond, I think, when you grow up together and you go through all the same stuff together. You like, I don't laugh with anyone like I laugh with my sister. Like, I don't know, there's something just really interesting about that relationship. And so I don't know that I would say like that my relationship with my sister directly influenced writing this particular narrative, but I think because, I do have this older sister who means so much to me. I dedicated my first book to her, that I think for my main character, Natasha, I could feel so deeply her pain and anger at the thought of her sister being gone. So, yeah, I don't know. There's just something about sibling relationships that is really interesting to write about.
And interesting to read about as well. And you mentioned something just now that we were talking about before the sessions, angry girls. Let's talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, so we both write about pissed off girls, I think, right? Which some readers love. Like I hear from some readers who are like, "Oh, Natasha's anger was so cathartic for me. Like I loved reading an angry girl." And then I hear from readers who are like, "That anger was too much. That was just I couldn't handle it." And like I understand where they're coming from. Like it can be really difficult to spend time in the head of a character who is just volatilely, you know, angry all the time. But I think for me, like or I think most women growing up in this world as a woman, we don't always get to express our anger. Even though I think especially teenage girls have a lot of it. I know I did. I still have a lot of it. So
Absolutely.
I think for me, getting to write an angry teenage girl and not temper that anger, not try to, make it smaller, but to let her anger be big and powerful and aggressive, was important for me as a writer.
I would agree with all of that. I definitely kind of came at it from the thought that I am someone who definitely experiences anger and has experienced anger that I haven't felt able to express, and still struggle with feeling able to express all the time in the ways that I want to, or the ways that just feel like this is what would be cathartic, but I can't do that. So I kind of did it through, I had that happen through dairy instead, where it's like she can do these things and she can actually let those emotions out and she can actually kind of point them in the direction of the people who are hurting her, who in real life you might not ever be able to actually confront or get any kind of justice from. And I wanted her to have a chance to actually just deal with it, like actually experience it. And with her, she also kind of struggles between, she's very angry and she feels these really, really angry, violent feelings, but she's also really naturally super compassionate. And so she is trying to figure out how to both be a compassionate person and how to be angry, because I don't think those are opposites, but we are taught that they are.
Mhm.
And so she's trying to figure out how to balance them.
I love all of this. I was listening to a podcast recently, and it was talking about how societal expectations of women are to stay small and quiet, not and not just both physically and mentally and emotionally. They just want to put us in that box, and I love the rebellion of all that, and just breaking out of that. That's fantastic. Both of your books also have very similar settings. Tell us more about why you chose for your story to take place in the wild.
Oh, okay.
You go ahead.
So for me, it was because I love being in the woods. So like I grew up like in that generation, like right before like you just weren't allowed to be out on your own anymore as a kid, you know? So like my childhood was just in the woods all day with my dog, like by myself running around. So like I naturally gravitate toward those spaces. And, you know, like in my free time, what I want to be doing is be out hiking, be in the woods. I don't always feel safe doing that, which is a lot of what this book is about. But that's what I want to be doing. And like while I was writing The River Has Teeth, I was also taking like an amateur naturalist course. And so I got to be out like while I was learning all of these concepts, all these ecological kind of natural history and like learning the plants and learning the trees and the animals and the insects. So it was this really immersive experience of writing this book and really being like out in the wild while I'm writing it. It was definitely my favorite part of writing this book.
I wasn't necessarily like raised in nature, but I had a lot because I was and still am a very delicate child. I don't always like nature. I don't like bugs. I don't like to be uncomfortable. I also love nature, so it's like that conflict. But I did still spend a lot of time outside as a kid, and the first school that I went to was actually on the border of this forest that we would sometimes go into to take walks and everything. And the area where I grew up in Indiana was a town, but it was the kind of town where you still were never very far from nature and never very far from a lot of trees and areas that could get very spooky. And also, my parents are very much more nature based than I am. They love it. Our backyard was huge for where we lived in the city, and it's so it's cultivated, but it looks wild, like to the point where we call it the jungle. And I would, as a kid, just love to go back there. There's loads of trees, loads and loads and loads of trees, and I would just go back there and pretend like I was in the wilderness. And it's hard not to write towards that because I think that's both the aesthetic and the feel that I am just always looking to recapture in some ways, of that feeling of being like surrounded and a little bit lost and a little bit scared, but also real magic because it always felt super magical to me.
I agree. There's just something special and majestic about trees. I mean, they're fascinating and they're beautiful and strange and mysterious all at the same time. And both of your books do a wonderful job of taking us to that place. You talked a little bit about the research you did for your book. Can you tell us a little bit more about your research process?
Sure, yeah. So for me, it was really hands-on. So like I was taking this naturalist course, hiking in all of these parks in and around Nashville, and I'd have my like iNaturalist app. So you know, I'd go out there and I'm like, I don't know what this flower is. Take a picture of it, look it up on the iNaturalist app. Same thing for like insects and just anything I came across. It was just this like constant curiosity, wanting to like learn all of the native flora and fauna. And then also, I was reading up a lot on how trees are connected underground. So kind of the like I think it's been called like the worldwide wood, you know, like how all of these trees are connected by underground fungal networks, and how a forest is this like large organism where all of the trees are communicating with each other and in connection with each other. So I was learning about all of that, and that really informed a lot of the magic of the book, especially Della's magic. So she has this kind of magic where she can tap into plant life, and so she can kind of hook up into that sort of network between the living things and use it both to grow things or to borrow energy. And so it can be, you know, really powerful and positive or really destructive. Yeah, so it was mostly just a lot of hiking and a lot of looking things up on the internet.
I did for this one, I didn't do loads and loads of like direct necessarily research. It was more reading folklore and urban legends and fairy tales and kind of drawing on the ones that I grew up with.
Mhm.
Because that's kind of what I wanted to pull on for the forest primarily, especially kind of like trying to create that feeling of a forest that is really beautiful, but there's also something weird, but not quite. I didn't want to go like total just cliche like forbidden forest kind of thing. I wanted it to feel a little different and to feel rooted in something. So I definitely explored a lot of like the stories I had grown up on, and tried to think about them in a new way, I guess.
That's great. What are some of the stories that you drew from?
One that actually, okay, so this one is not very present anymore, but I still think of it every time because it built the base of the book, and it's going to be weird because it's not a spooky one at all. It's the 12 Dancing Princesses, which is my one of my favorite fairy tales from when I was a kid. And a lot. It actually started as a retelling of that. It's not anymore. It went so far away from it, but
Mhm.
there's still some bones there. And some of the big ones were this image of these princesses escaping into, it depends on like the version and stuff, but like escaping into a magic forest or escaping into a lake, and just the magic of that area and what that could become for them and what they could be there that's different from what they could be in like their real life. And I kind of took that and made it spooky.
That is so interesting. I'm gonna have to look that one up. I wasn't familiar with that one. I need to find out a little bit more about it. Let's talk for a minute about how you address gender and sexuality in your books and why that's so important.
Yeah, I mean, it's the sort of thing I every character basically is some version of queer because that's what my world is like, honestly. It's just like to me it's an honest depiction of just
Mhm.
what my world looks like. Queer people flock together. I'm bisexual. My friends are all some level of something, whether it's queer in their gender, sexuality, or both. A lot of both. um, and it's just important to me because I definitely grew up at a time where we did not have as much representation in that area as luckily a lot of teens do now. Like we can still do better, but you can also like make a huge list of all of the like queer books coming out in 1 month when it used to be read this one that came out 2 years ago and that's what you have, and then like watch But I'm a Cheerleader, watch Debs, and that's pretty much what you had. And I just really wanted to write something where it with this one it's not about those identities at all. I just wanted them to be able to be magic and be able to be in an adventure and be like heroes, and for it to just be a statement, just like, yeah, I'm asexual, I'm non-binary, things like that. Like just have it be this is part of the world because to me it just is.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, I have a really similar answer. Just I'm bi. Most of my friends are some version of queer, and so it is just writing your world. But also for me because I did grow up in the rural South, low income in the rural South. And I didn't know really any gay people. The only gay people in my town I heard of spoken of really badly, and there weren't books in the library. There weren't characters on TV shows or movies. So it's not like today where a kid can like kind of go, I might be gay, like get on TikTok, and like find some connection, find some education. It was sort of like, you know, back then it was like this is just a bad thing, and so you don't want to be this thing. And so for me, like I really want to write queer characters, but it's also important to me that I write queer characters from low income backgrounds because I think a lot of what we've had, like we have so much amazing LGBTQ representation now, but a lot of it is kind of middle and upper class kids.
Mhm.
And so something I'm trying to do in every book is make sure that I have characters who are both queer and from a low income background because obviously like we exist, and I hope that kids who grew up in circumstances like mine, where I grew up, that now they can grab my book off the shelf and see themselves in it. I hope.
Yes, there's a saying, windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors, and I think that's so important for us all. We do have a question in the chat. Language changes so much and so quickly with teenagers. How do you get your dialogue to sound real and current?
I don't try to be hip. um, yeah, I think, by the time I, like even learned what words teenagers are using now, they'd probably be onto something else. So for me, what I do is just use language that feels as lasting as possible, I guess, without feeling like old timey. But I don't think that's something like I'll pay a ton of attention to. Like, I think it's more for me writing YA, it's more like, does this character think in a way that a teenager would think? Like, do they sound like someone who's at the developmental process level of a teenager, or are they talking like me at 35 looking back at my teen years? So I think it's more about, for me, it's more about perspective and the character itself and working on their voice, as opposed to like trying to make my characters sound like teenagers. But again, that's just my approach.
I 100% agree, honestly. I was actually, when I saw the question, I started formulating an answer and then you just said it. Because I was like, yeah, I was thinking, I honestly, I'm 31 and I just started realizing in the past couple of years that I don't know current teen slang. I'll see tweets from teens and I'll just be like, I don't know what this says.
And it's not always hard to even figure it out, like I'll occasionally
Yeah.
ask my like 13-year-old nephew, like, hey bud, what's going on here, what's this? And he's like, I can't even really explain it to you, like you'd have to watch these like 3 TikToks first to even understand. Like,
Yes.
like there's so much meme culture, like, so he's like you got to go watch all this and then maybe you'll get it, maybe.
Yeah, and by the time you figure it out, it's probably not being used nearly as much as it was when you first started trying to figure it out. Because there's some that I'm still trying to figure out that I don't think people say anymore. So I just don't try. I just don't try to do the slang and everything. I definitely focus more on just that perspective that Erica was talking about. Like, something I love about writing teenagers is that teenagers feel every emotion so much. It's so big. Every emotion feels like the biggest emotion you'll ever feel and might be the biggest emotion that you'll ever feel. Um, Everything is so big and so important. And as a teen, like I always got told, like, this is a phase, this will pass, this will like go away or whatever. And I always found that really frustrating. And I find it frustrating still as an adult because it's like, okay, even if that feeling does pass, it's real right now and that matters, and that's how I like to write. And so I tend to just not think about slang. I think about, how would a character who is just feeling everything so much all the time, how do they talk? Are they open with those emotions? Are they closed off? you know I also just do a lot of like banter between friends because that's how my friends and I always have been, so I kind of draw on that and just avoid trying to do any sort of references that date me way too much.
Well, and you both talked a lot about character. So let's explore character development just a little bit more. Um, do the characters live in your head? How do they come to life on the page?
It can vary a lot. Like my first book, where it started was like, I think I was in bed one night and I just had this whole like voice come to me, and it was like, my daddy named me Shady Grove after the old Appalachian song. He knew that's who I was as soon as I opened my pretty brown eyes and screamed at the world like my heart was breaking. Like, it literally just was like,
Oh,
hello,
I
I'm
love
Shady
that.
Grove. Here's my story. And so for me, that's how her story unfolded, was just getting to know her voice. And Ghostwood Song is a very like kind of voicey sort of book, I guess. It's very Southern. The River Has Teeth, I guess, was a little more of a process. Like, I think I have two point of views, and I think Della came to me first, um, maybe because she's sort of the closest to my own kind of outlook on the world and voice. But yeah, so some books, they come and it's just like a voice is here, a character is already sort of like, hey, I'm here. And then other books, you have to sort of work at them and kind of chisel them out and figure out who they are.
I would agree with that. Like, I feel like Derry, my protagonist, came to me fairly naturally. I kind of just I had the story idea first, and then I just kind of thought I just started writing, and discovering her voice as I wrote is kind of something I do a lot, but I had a sense of her when I started writing, and I can't really explain where it came from. It is just that feeling of, yeah, she's just here now, and I just have to find everything. I just have to figure her out. Um, some characters are much harder, some characters require much more mining, some just appear. I also tend to, for some parts of a character, I draw on the things that I always wanted to see in books and didn't get to see as much, like the angry girl thing, which is there's lots more books now where it's like angry girls, and I love them. I will always pick them up. They make me so happy. But also things like dairy is fat, and that was really important to me because in high school or as a kid, I never read books where a fat kid was the hero or
Right.
anything other than a joke or a villain or pitiable or anything like that. And I definitely like it was one of those things where for a while I never wrote fat characters because I didn't think that was allowed. I just kind of figured, well, these are who the protagonists are. And I was in college before I thought to write a fat character for myself. And then also uh, thinking about things like I have anxiety and depression and ADHD and all these things. And I don't want to write a book that is about that necessarily, but I want to have characters who are going through it. Like it's part of their lives, 'cause it's part of my daily life. And I want to be able to kind of express that. So some of the characters tend to come from what do I what did high school me always miss seeing? Like what could have really helped her? What could have helped 17-year-old Sarah to pick up and see in a book? And then kind of go from there and try to make them more than that because I don't want them to just be the bad character. I also want them to be a person. But sometimes I start there.
Oh, I love that. Um, and you touched on something that incorporates our next question. Both of your books address some tough topics. How do you navigate that?
I think teenagers go through a lot of difficult things, you know? Like I know teenagers who at 13 who have been through more than other people do at 20. So I don't think there's any topic that is off limits for teenagers or for YA. I think it's all in how you handle it, you know? You're not going to write a YA novel about poverty in the same way you would an adult novel or about sexual assault or, you know, like you're going to have to handle it in a way that's appropriate for a teenage audience. So for me, it's kind of that balance between like, here's something I feel kind of raw about. A lot of my writing comes from something that is inside me and that I feel deeply about. And so, you know, those early drafts are sort of me just letting all of that out on the page. And then as I go through, I'm like, okay, now how do I write this appropriately for a teenage audience so that it's tailored to where they are right now and in a way that they can understand and grab onto, that's developmentally appropriate and that at the end won't leave them feeling cynical or like the world is too hard or like they're not enough. So I think YA, you kind of have to infuse some hope into it, even when you have really hard topics. Like my book is, I like the way I handle kind of issues around like women feeling unsafe and violence against women. Like I go hard on those topics, and I would call the end of my book more cathartic than anything else. But it still has to be, I think, infused with hope and resilience and the idea that the world that you can handle the world, like you are up to the task and you can make the world a little bit better too.
I agree with that. This is another one where I'm just going to say, like, I feel like I'm in conversation with my teenage self and thinking about what she needed because the big topics I deal with tend to be around in everything I write, but especially in Dark and Starless Forest, tend to be around emotional abuse and psychological abuse and dealing with that and the many complexities of it, like it not feeling like it's actually, it doesn't count, you know, because it's not like they hit you. And it's like, but that's how it feels when you're in that situation. And in A Dark and Starless Forest, the stuff Derry experiences around that is based on things I experienced in high school. So these were things that I was experiencing as a teenager, but did not really see in books or anything. And it made me really confused about a lot of things. And I feel like it would have helped me to see a book that dealt with it in like a hopefully I tried to be nuanced. Hopefully I succeeded. Like a nuanced way and yeah, a hopeful way of like not hiding how dark it is, not hiding the pain, not talking down about it, but also trying to say, but look, I can tell you from this side that there's light in here, there's hope in here, and kind of trying to infuse that hope, like Erica said. I think that's really important. I think I would think of the ending of my book as also being like cathartic towards the happy end. But yeah, I think that's kind of how I go about it, is just I think teens can handle it. It's just that you have to think about how you're doing it. I don't want to be all like doom and gloom. Everything is terrible forever. Your life is terrible forever. The world is terrible forever, because that doesn't help when you're a teen and you already feel that way.
I absolutely agree with all of that. I'm a high school librarian and work with teenagers all the time, and they're so messy and complicated and wonderful, and I just love it. And as an adult reader who didn't have books that explored those topics, they were more nicey. I find it helpful as reading as an adult too, and looking back on that in my own life, and then also understanding the students that I work with every day. So I really appreciate that about your books. We have a couple more questions in the chat that I want to be sure to get to. Are there books or writers that influenced you both to lean toward writing fantasy and darker books for YA readers?
That was my cat.
That's wonderful. I love it.
I think one of the first fantasy novels I read that made me go, wow, like I didn't know YA fantasy could do all this, I think was probably like Laini Taylor. What is it? Shadow and Bone, is that it?
No, that's
No.
Lieber.
Oh
my
yeah,
God, it's right there.
but I
know
am
what you're
talking about Laini Taylor,
The
like
daughter
of Smoke and Bone.
Smoke and
Yes,
Bone. Yeah.
thank you. Yeah, I think that was the first like YA fantasy book I read where I was like, whoa, I want to do that. And then I think the darkness sort of naturally just sort of creeped into my writing. I'm not really sure why. Like maybe it's because I was an R.L. Stine kid growing up. Or like, I don't know, I grew up in a haunted house, maybe that stuff's just in there. But I think the book that made me realize I could write The River Has Teeth was Claire Legrand's Sawkill Girls. That was the book that I went, oh, this is what I want to be writing right here. That one was pretty big for me.
I love that book. On the fantasy side, I've kind of just always been a nerd. I was raised by nerds. My dad's favorite book is Lord of the Rings. My mom has read like every single Stephen King book. So I was also raised on horror. I was raised on a mix of sci-fi, fantasy, and horror. So I was always going to be this way. And I guess I never really thought to write anything else because it was just what I loved so much. The darkness, I think, I feel like it did kind of come in like naturally in some ways, because I mean, I was, like I said, like raised on horror and stuff. One of my favorite movies slash miniseries when I was like 8 was Stephen King's It and the Langoliers. And I don't know why I was watching those at 8, but I loved them. And I was also an R.L. Stine kid. Although I skipped Goosebumps, I went right to Fear Street. I devoured Fear Street, which when I watched the movies on Netflix, I was like, these seem really gory. But I went back and read some of the books, and it's like, oh no, that's just how these books are. These books are really bloody. And I feel like that kind of influenced me. But I would say that there are definitely some YA books that kind of trended more towards dark that made me feel like I could write that. One that is not necessarily, I don't know if it's considered dark at all, but it kind of deals with these like harder topics and emotions while also being magic, is A Great and Terrible Beauty by Libba Bray, which is a slightly like older poll, but are definitely the books that I kind of come back to again and again when I think of like what I want to write and this tone I want to strike in a lot of ways. And then I think that was just deepened by, yeah, like books like Sock Hill Girls or Wilder Girls, which is also great. And I was so thrilled when my publisher used it as like a comp book title, because I was like, yes, that's all I want. And then also definitely influenced by some of my writer friends, where I saw them exploring like dark, scary, or just deep topics in sci-fi and fantasy in ways that I thought were really beautiful. And I kind of like, I want to be like them. And I want to make readers feel the way they make me feel, I guess.
Oh, that's wonderful. And some great, great books. Love all those. Well, let's divert for just a minute and talk about your pets, your terrible dogs and your alien cats.
Yeah, so I don't know if you heard my beagle braying
I
just
did.
now. Yeah, that was Nutmeg. So I have a beagle named Nutmeg and I have a Chihuahua mix named Luna. And they're both rescues and like we're not great trainers, so they're kind of just terrible. Like Nutmeg came to us with like more anxiety than I thought one being could hold in its body. So like her now is like 10 times better than when we got her. But yeah, like she like keeps us on a timetable. Like if you don't do everything at exactly the same time every day, she'll come and get you. Like it's time for you to go upstairs and work, or like it's time for my medicine. So she's like drill sergeant. And then our other dog Luna is like, I don't know, like Satan's minion. She's like all chihuahuas, like she's like the Dark Lord, and we like love her, and she kind of runs the show too. Yeah, so no kids here. So definitely a millennial in that respect. Dogs are kind of running the show.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I have 3 cats. I only had 2 when I wrote that bio. And the reason I described them as aliens is because they're really weird. I've had people like tell me how weird they are, even for cats. I had a roommate once who like went and stayed with a friend and her cat for a while, and then when she got back, she was like, you know, with that cat, it's a cat. It's just like that's a cat. But with your cats, I see them looking at me and they're thinking. And um, uh, especially my oldest cat, Carlos, the scientist kitty, he has a weirdly human face. I have a lot of photo comparisons of him with Elijah Wood because he looks weirdly like Elijah Wood. And he's just a weird cat. I can't explain it. You have to experience it. And then we got Podrick, who I think just kind of learned from Carlos to be super weird. And then a few months ago, we rescued regular sized Rudy, who is currently fighting Carlos on the bed. And he is definitely weird, but he's also still a kitten. He's growing into his personality, so we'll see if he ends up as weird as these two. But I love them all. They're all so terrible, especially Rudy. Kittens are the worst. He gets away with everything because he's so cute, and I love his little face so much. But he's terrible.
That's wonderful. The cuteness goes a long way. We have one other question in the chat. Did the pandemic affect how you wrote or what you wanted to write about?
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Sarah.
I mean, it's just like it definitely made writing a lot harder, like just to do in general, especially since I was still working on like revisions for A Dark and Starless Forest, and I hadn't started anything new yet. And it was my first time like doing revisions with an editor and everything, and I was doubting myself constantly, and also just so tired because it's amazing how exhausting it is to live in a pandemic. But I didn't think it affected what I wanted to write that much. But the book I'm working on now does deal kind of a lot with isolation. um, so maybe it did affect it a little bit, a tiny bit. But it definitely made it a little harder to write. I've had to find a lot of new tactics. It was already hard because of the ADHD, but just had to learn a lot of new tactics for dealing with it, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the early days of the pandemic, like I was wrapping up revisions on The River Has Teeth, and then like my third book is like what I would think of as my pandemic book, The Restless Start, which comes out next year. Because I first got the idea for it like actually when I was staying in this canyon, like near this canyon in Georgia, like we went, and then like while we were there is when like things exploded with like early days of the pandemic, like like no toilet paper, like we were like away from home and we're like there's no toilet paper, what are we gonna do, like we're trying to like find toilet paper like while we're like on vacation. But that vacation was in this kind of this Cloudland Canyon in like near the Chattanooga border. And like the first time we went to this canyon, it was like, I don't know, we got there really early and like nobody was really there, and it was like really, really foggy and kind of eerie. And so I was like, oh, I'm going to write about this place. Like I could just feel it. And then it ended up being like, yeah, writing during the pandemic, like Sarah said, it was hard. There was just so much stress and a lot of like mental load, I think, for everyone to be adding on like hardcore deadlines, like having to write a book really fast. So I think in that way it influenced me. And then also The Restless Start is of my books, the one that's most isolated. It's like it takes place in this one canyon, and it's like a closed contest, and so you don't see the main characters like families or friends. It's just like them in this canyon and this really isolated, scary place, kind of lost in the fog, which sounds a lot like the pandemic, doesn't
Yeah,
it?
it does.
Yeah, mine is also just like two characters lost in an isolated area, except it's a corn maze. And you never meet basically anyone else in their lives. It's just them in this corn maze that is seemingly never ending and constantly changing.
Wow, that sounds just like the pandemic.
That's very interesting. I love that. So you talked a little bit about what's coming next. Is there anything that you would like to tell us about what's up next for you? What's coming out next?
So The Restless Start comes out next October, and it is about two girls who team up in kind of a spooky contest to find the missing body of a serial killer in a really foggy canyon. And people start going missing and getting hurt, and everybody's kind of going a little wild out there in the fogs of the canyon. So it's sort of a queer, spooky murder mystery, supernatural sort of book that I wrote during the pandemic. So please buy it.
I don't have anything I can announce, but I am working on what's next, and hopefully in the not too distant future I'll be able to actually have things I can actually say about it. But I am working on my corn maze book that I'm having a lot of fun with, and will hopefully be very spooky.
Well, we can't wait to hear more about it. We are just about at the end of the session. I want to thank you both for a wonderful time tonight. And I want to thank our audience for attending. Please remember to purchase these wonderful books through Parnassus. You'll find the link to purchase in the chat. And remember that the festival sessions continue online through October 10th. So be sure to tune back in. Sarah, Erica, thank you so much. And I wish you both the best.
Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for hosting and asking such great questions.
All right.
Agreed.
Good night, everyone.
Bye.